The day after DiCarlo met with investigators, the case against the Manson family took a dramatic turn when Vincent Bugliosi was chosen as prosecuting attorney, along with Aaron Stovitz. That afternoon, the LAPD handcuffed Danny and drove him to Spahn Ranch to search for shell casings. The cuffs were his terms. He knew Charlie was getting info passed to him from Chatsworth. Charlie's eyes and ears, Sandy and Squeaky, were in Inyo, but somebody at Spahn Ranch was gabbing. Bugliosi recalled that visit. Old man George Spahn was sitting in this dilapidated shack where he lived. He was wearing sunglasses and a Stetson, and he had a chihuahua in his lap. He was listening to Sonny James on the radio while one of the hippie girls prepared lunch for him. We kept Danny in handcuffs so none of the family still there would suspect he was cooperating. He took us to where Charlie and the others did their target practice shooting. We found casings from a .22 caliber revolver. Danny later told us he'd seen the revolver, located by Stephen Weiss back in September, in Manson's hand. When LAPD test fired it, the casings matched those we found at the ranch. Then the prosecutor drove to Death Valley. It was extremely rough country. I was looking for boots. There were bloody boot prints at the Tate residence. I didn't find them, but I did find lots of magazines with articles about Hitler, and the detectives found the wire cutters that, it would turn out, had been used to cut the telephone line at the Tate residence. And Bugliosi remembered the first time he saw Manson. He was in jail in Independence. I watched 3 or 4 sheriff's deputies walk him into the courthouse. I was shocked by how little he was. He was scruffy, with long, scraggly hair, and kind of hunchbacked. I thought, he doesn't look imposing. But I'd already learned enough about him to know that it would be a great error on my part to underestimate him. Bugliosi had made a name for himself in the LA prosecutor's office as a ferocious litigator, but he stepped on toes along the way, including the way he took over the case against the Manson family. Traditionally, the role of the prosecutor has been twofold: to handle the legal aspects of the case and to present in court the evidence gathered by law enforcement agencies. Bugliosi wrote in his best-selling book based on the trials. I never accepted these limitations. In past cases, I always joined in the investigation, going out and interviewing witnesses myself, tracking down and developing new leads, often finding evidence otherwise overlooked. In some cases, this led to the release of a suspect. In others, to a conviction that otherwise might not have been obtained. For a lawyer to do less than his utmost is, I strongly feel, a betrayal of his client. Though in criminal trials one tends to focus on the defense attorney and his client, the accused, the prosecutor is also a lawyer, and he too has a client, the people. And the people are equally entitled to their day in court, to a fair and impartial trial, and to justice. I have nothing but respect for Bugliosi as a lawyer, but his attitude pissed me off, remembered Sergeant McCann. He didn't solve the case. We solved the case. We brought the case to the district attorney's office. He found more evidence, but that's what he's supposed to do. Actually, McCann, lead investigator at Tate, didn't solve the case. The Hinman team put the pieces together. Danny Galindo defended the prosecutor. Vince Bugliosi was intense. Boy, was he intense. If I interviewed somebody and didn't get something he wanted, he re-interviewed them. But I didn't mind. Conviction meant proving these people guilty. He's the guy who made the case. The problem is that when you interview and re-interview witnesses, sometimes their stories eventually fit your narrative. Witnesses can be led or convinced that your version of the truth is what really happened, particularly after long, exhaustive interviews in police stations and jails. particularly when those witnesses are very young and impressionable. On November 25th, McCann and Sergeant Patchett of the Tate team interviewed Ronnie Howard at Sybil Brand. She provided a wealth of information, including about Hinman. Susan said that Bobby was trying to take Charlie's place, showing him that he wasn't the only one that could do things. He could too. Susan claimed she was the one who stabbed Hinman and that the victim was a hippie and he owed them some money or something. He owed this Bobby and her some money and some other girl. Howard thought Susan told her the other woman at Hinman's was Katie, and she also bragged that killing was as pleasurable as a sexual climax. About Cielo Drive. Susan told Ronnie that August 9th was the first time she had been to the house. See earlier rumors that Susan and Gypsy swam in the Cielo Drive pool during summer of '69. That the house was selected because of Terry Melcher. She said, "He is too hung up materially, and we wanted to show him that all these material things don't mean a thing." They wanted to strike back at him. Susan acted enthused when she told us about gruesome things like this. Like on the Tate deal, she said that they were going to pull the people's eyeballs out and gouge them against the walls. Sharon asked Susan, "Why are you doing this? Don't kill me. Let me live just for my baby." And Sadie said, "I got no feelings for you, bitch. We're doing you a favor. We're releasing you from this earth." Like she said, people, really, you don't live until you die. Susan also claimed she was the one who stabbed Sharon Tate. "Well, it felt so good," she said, "the first time that I stabbed her." She made a motion, and that is when I told her, I said, "I don't believe you did it." I said, "What does it feel like when you stab somebody?" I said, "I know because, like I told you, I have stabbed somebody." And she kind of doubted me, and I said, "Well, it has been quite a while ago. I told you the deal about my ex-husband." And I said, "Did it feel kind of like a pillow?" And she said, "Yeah." And she got all enthused. It felt like going into nothing, just like into air. About Manson. They call themselves a family. Charlie was supposed to be like the father. They called him the devil, or like she said, he is the devil sometimes, and other times he is Jesus Christ. Like she said, Charlie has her mind, and a few of the other girls there too, that he can control a woman's mind easier than he can a man's. That's why I think she said there were many more girls there than there were men. Susan doesn't think too much of colored people. She thinks, well, white people should stick together and colored people should stick together. She said she thought that it would make the colored people wake up and take notice that this is what they should do to get what they want out of the world. Susan bragged that the family was responsible for another 11 murders the police would never solve. She also said, "I'll make those psychiatrists think that I am crazy." In exchange for agreeing to testify at the grand jury, Ronnie was given parole on her existing charges. She was also in line to receive the $25,000 reward put up by friends of Polanski's. But she told investigators, "I am not interested in the money. I just felt those people shouldn't be running around loose." On November 26th, Bobby got a hung jury in the Hinman trial. Bugliosi immediately had the new trial transferred to his docket. Bobby was arraigned to stand trial on December 12th, and that day, Virginia Graham finally got an audience with a counselor at Corona State Prison. Tex had managed to shuck off his homicidal family persona and settle back into life as Charles Watson of Copeville, Texas. He was helping his dad at the general store and dating a girl he knew from college. With the exception of smoking grass, he was living a free and clean life just 3 months after he butchered 8 human beings. That changed on November 30th, when his own cousin, a deputy sheriff, showed up at the Watson home with a warrant. When they first found out back there that Tex was wanted for these murders, the general consensus was that this was a case of mistaken identity. They knew him as the All-American Boy. 2 LAPD sheriffs, Sartucci and Nielsen, flew to Dallas to pick up their culprit. On the instruction of Watson's attorney, Bill Boyd, the Los Angeles detectives were not allowed to speak to his client. Sheriff Montgomery wouldn't even permit them to fingerprint him. Sartucci and Nielsen did see Watson, however, accidentally. While they were talking to the sheriff, Watson passed them on the stairs, on his way to the visitor's room. According to their report, he was well-dressed, clean-shaven, with short, not long hair. He appeared in good health and looked like a clean-cut college boy. Sartucci and Nielsen returned to Los Angeles, convinced we'd have little cooperation from the local authorities. Sure enough, Watson's legal team successfully fought extradition for more than 9 months after his arrest. On December 1st, LAPD Chief Davis announced at a news conference that the Tate LaBianca case had finally been cracked. Arrest warrants were issued for those not yet in custody, Pat and Linda. Leslie was held over in Independence on the arson charge. She, with Grogan, Gypsy, Oish, Brenda, and Snake, were transported to Los Angeles, subpoenaed for the coming grand jury. Patricia was in Alabama with her mother's family. She was dating a young man whom she'd confided that she was wanted for murder. Pat was riding in a car with the man when she was pulled over and apprehended. On the 1st, Bruce returned to California. He had flown back to London in mid-November after Zero's suicide, and when he returned to the States, Davis hid out in Bakersfield for the next year. He went underground. That day, in London, Sandy Good's ex-boyfriend Joel Pugh was found dead of an apparent suicide. He was lying on his back, unclothed except for a sheet over his lower body, his throat slit twice, slash marks on both wrists, and 2 bloody razor blades nearby. Mr. Pugh had checked into the room on October 27th, accompanied by an unknown young woman who had left after 3 weeks. His room was on the ground floor and could be entered and exited through a window. No fingerprints were taken, and the case was listed as a suicide and closed. The suspicion that Bruce might have killed Pugh seems unlikely, unless Joel had been dead a couple of days before the discovery of his body. Davis departed for the States hours before Joel's body was found. On December 2nd, Linda turned herself in at the Concord, New Hampshire police station and offered full cooperation. She was nearly 6 months pregnant. Also on December 2nd, Mary spoke to police in Wisconsin and got an immunity deal. She agreed to help the investigators and told them where to find Shorty's 1962 Mercury, hidden months earlier in Canoga Park. LAPD were dispatched to the scene, where they found the car and several key pieces of evidence, including a palm print later identified as Bruce Davis's. But they didn't yet know that Mary had been at Hinman's. That same day, Barbara Hoyt contacted the police. On December 3rd, Linda waived extradition and was driven by police to Boston, then flown back to Los Angeles. There she was booked into custody, thankfully put into solitary confinement when she arrived at the women's jail. Also on the 3rd, Stephanie Schramm spoke to investigators about life at Barker and Spawn ranches, including what she called the murder school that Manson had been running. Bugliosi was preparing for the grand jury. He had several witnesses who could testify about Manson's behavior that summer, the criminal activity surrounding the family, and what had been alleged about the killings. But the coup de grace would be an eyewitness. There was only one willing to talk, and that was Susan Atkins. Her public defender, Richard Caballero, wanted to get an immunity deal for his client in exchange for her testimony. The prosecutor agreed. She was his ace in the hole. But this meant Bugliosi's office was required to share information with Atkins' legal counsel. We said that if Susan would cooperate with us, we would probably let her plead guilty to second-degree murder, i.e., we would not seek the death sentence, but we would ask for life imprisonment. Caballero went to Sybil Brand, and talk to his client. He would later testify, "I told her what the problems were, what the evidence was against her. I indicated to her that there is no question in my mind but they were going to seek the death penalty and that they would probably get it." Susan was undecided. She might be willing to testify before the grand jury, but he was sure she would never testify against the others at the trial. She was still under Manson's domination. Any minute, she could bolt back to him. He said he'd let me know what she finally decided. It was left hanging there. Though we had the Howard Graham statements implicating Atkins and physical evidence linking Watson to the Tate murder scene, our whole case against Manson and the others rested on the decision of Sadie Mae Glutz. Susan recalled that Richard wanted to try to save my life, hoping to work out a deal with the district attorney's office that would allow me to plead guilty to a lesser crime and get off with a life sentence. She told her attorney everything, including Hinman's murder, the killings at Cielo Drive, and what she knew of Waverly Drive and Shorty's death. She named names and agreed to testify before the grand jury. Caballero went to Bugliosi with his offer. Bugliosi was uncomfortable granting immunity to someone like Atkins who participated in the murders, but he needed her story to convict Manson and the others. That same day, police successfully matched Pat's fingerprints to those found at the Benedict Canyon crime scene. The PD also confirmed fingerprint matches at Cielo to Tex Watson.